Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good Monday and happy Indigenous Peoples Day to all of you watching in Alaska today. It is the 10th of October, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date on your local weather information. We give you lots of different ways to find that information at your convenience. You can do that online at weather.gov/Alaska. You can listen to the NOAA Weather Radio Report on your Marine VHF channel or give us a call at 800-472-0391. Email's always fun. You can send us a note at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. That's a long address, but it'll get right to the TV weather desk, and I'll be happy to guide you to the information that you're looking for, or if you just have a question about the show, we're happy to answer that as well. Once again, just a quick reminder, the broadcast times. If you're watching us at 5 o'clock in the morning in Alaska Public Media, you do have some earlier options, and that is found on the AKwx system through Alaska Public Broadcasting. If you're watching in the bush, chances are that's your preferred mode of transmission there, 5:30 p.m. each night. KUAC, our friends up in Fairbanks, are showing this show on their 9.4 channel. It's UAF TV at 5:30 each night. 360 North at 7:30, 7 days a week, with one little star by that. As we get into next week, the AFN convention, there will be a couple interruptions there. So you will still get your Alaska weather updates, but it might be a little bit later on in the evening. I believe those dates will be Monday, and I want to say Thursday and Friday. Don't quote me on that, but you're going to have some changes next week during the AFN convention as 360 North brings you that very important convention and meeting from our friends and elders all across the state. And of course on Alaska Public Media, not only can you get it at 5 o'clock in the morning, but they also host the YouTube channel. So make sure you go to YouTube, type in youtube.com/AKwx TV, short for Alaska Weather TV, and about 7:30 or so you can usually find the complete broadcast on YouTube as well. So a whole lot of different ways to get the same information you love. Here's a look at the entire state, and not a whole lot has changed since the last time I spoke to you, and over the weekend since Dave Percy spoke to you as well. High pressure is still in charge across the central and the eastern Gulf, and look at all the severe clear across parts of southeastern Alaska. Now there has been some morning fog, hit and miss across some of those regions underneath that very stable dome of high pressure, but the southeasterly flow is still going strong across the western Gulf as well. So not only do we have one wave of low pressure working its way northward, we have a second one right behind it, and even two systems for now can't beat out that rough, tough, and hard to bluff area of high pressure across the eastern Gulf and southeastern Alaska. But it is starting to fade away. So by Wednesday and Thursday, clouds will shift across the Gulf and head for southeast, and of course that means a return to liquid sunshine for you. But how far north will the precipitation make it up into the interior? And how far south will the cold make it? Well, we'll have to see. Well, the surface charts are coming up here in a minute. In the meantime, it has been kind of a blustery day across southwestern Alaska and across the Alaska Peninsula and the central and eastern chain, all because of that stiff southeasterly flow. Now, we did have some stronger winds moving across the central and eastern Aleutians earlier today. And there were storm force warnings out across parts of the southern Bering and the North Pacific. A lot of that has diminished, though, and will continue to be fairly blustery, but that really intense wind seems to be letting up a little bit more. Here's high pressure right now, 1,024 millibars, sitting just outside of Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather and Yakutat. And just to the north, a little bit stronger part of the ridge at 1,000, about 30 millibars or so, very close to Eagle and north of Tok. That's got some of the colder air locked up to the north and to the east across the Alcan border, where it is actually Thanksgiving Day for our friends in Canada. If there's any Canadians watching, happy Thanksgiving to you. As you look out across the southern parts of the interior into Kuskokwim Delta, as well as southwestern Alaska, you can see a little bit of a trough of low pressure there. That's just encouraging a lot of the wind to pour over the mountains, and there have been some reports of mountain waves in those regions today. If you've been flying, you might have noticed some of that. Out across the Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, you can see the effects of low pressure there at 972 millibars and 987 millibars. That's been pushing rain into the eastern chain, as well as Kodiak Island and parts of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, dry conditions back behind that, a little bit cooler, but not really cold just yet. We also had some rain up around Nome, Tin City, and Wales, and into the Kotzebue Sound region today. That was today. Let's look at what's coming our way tonight. Low pressure will organize itself more into one system here. So a central circulation at 966 millibars. It's still going to be blustery for the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and southwestern Alaska. The winds will be coming up for some along the capes there, and again, it may be a blustery night for you. But not really a whole lot further east. The winds settle down considerably with high pressure in charge. As that moves a little bit further north into the Copper River Basin, once again, don't be surprised if you run into some morning fog in some of your favorite valleys, and the same goes for the nooks and crannies in southeast as well. As you look northward, watch for clouds to sit across the north slope. A trough of low pressure will sit there and might create a little bit of a breeze, but by and large, high pressure still in charge of the, that rhymed, didn't it? That was kind of cool. High pressure still in charge of the Beaufort Seacoast, and because of that, those low clouds and that very stable air mass will sit in place at least for a little while longer. Out across St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, Pribilofs, watch for rain and some gusts there, with winds wrapping around to more of a north and westerly direction, pulling in behind low pressure as it works across the North Pacific. That low is actually going to move north and west as we get into Tuesday. The frontal boundary, the difference between that warmer and cooler air that's been wrapping up this whole time, is finally getting so well mixed that the front is actually not much of a thing anymore. As we get into Tuesday and Wednesday, this boundary pretty much disintegrates, and so we start making that dash, or kind of breaking this apart on the actual picture here to indicate that. So a very well mixed atmosphere at this point, with no major surge of cold or warm air to change that up. At 970 millibars, the central circulation there moves just north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and Nikolsky, with high pressure still holding very close to the Copper River Basin at 1018 millibars. Look at southeast. Pretty nice day here. Looks like the stronger south and easterly wind, though, starting to push some clouds a little bit further north into the central Gulf. Not quite yet into southeastern Alaska. So friends in southeast, Tuesday could be your day. Watch what happens on Wednesday. And as we get into the interior, you'll notice still a considerable amount of clear sky there. Some fair weather clouds around the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks and out toward Fort Yukon. And things look fairly quiet and dry for areas around the Kotzebue Sound region and the western Brooks, as well as the central and western interior into Norton Sound. Unalakleet, though, starts to see a few more clouds as we get into Tuesday. And here's Wednesday. Low pressure's on the move once again across the eastern chain and into the Alaska Peninsula, trying to work its way into the Gulf. And look what happens as that develops. Clouds and rain shift into southeastern Alaska. So a pretty significant change in the weather for you from Monday and Tuesday into Wednesday, where your liquid sunshine returns. And this is a little bit more typical of what you would expect for mid-October weather. Around Prince William Sound, periods of rain and breezy conditions there, and we're going to see the winds come up around south central Alaska as well. All the wind that we've been watching out here across the eastern chain, southwestern Alaska, is shifting into south central Alaska. So winds will be coming up on either side of Kodiak Island, into southern parts of Cook Inlet, and maybe into the western parts of the Gulf. We're not going to see the winds really come out in a big way just yet for Prince William Sound, but keep your eye on this. If you're making plans to move across the Gulf, there will be some blustery conditions and kind of rough seas as we get into the midweek. A look up the coast shows clouds are holding right around Ammonok and around Nunivak Island. We'll still see that northerly flow feeding into low pressure there, with relatively dry conditions north of the Alaska Range. Clouds expected around the Middle Tanana Valley and south and west of Fort Yukon, and we'll have low clouds and probably areas of fog, maybe frozen fog early in the morning for the North Slope. But things are pretty quiet up north and across the interior, with most of the wind and wave action across southwest, south central, and southwest, south central Alaska, with increasing rain and clouds across southeastern Alaska as we get into the midweek. That's where we're going for the rest of our early part of the week. Let's take a look at what happened today. 40s and 50s for most areas in the Panhandle, Ketchikan and Annette, in the low to mid 50s, 55 for Hyder and Stewart, around 49 degrees for Haines and Juneau and Skagway, 51 around Sitka earlier today. Yakutat was showing temperatures in the lower 50s, 49 for Cordova, 46 in Valdez. About the same in Anchorage today. Homer saw 53. It was 51 in Seward and Kodiak. Talkeetna northward toward Cantwell, temps were in the upper 40s, 55 around Healy. A little bit cooler in Fort Greeley at 46 today with 50 in Fairbanks. And around Eagle, it was 39 degrees. A little bit further down the road, it was 43 degrees in Northway and down around Tok. 36 was the temp at 3 o'clock for Fort Yukon. It was 34 degrees, a little bit cooler around Anaktuvik Pass. 30 for Kaktovik, 42 in Barrow with Atkasuk showing 33 degrees. Prudhoe Bay, I should say, in Dead Horse, lower 30s. Wainwright was 39. Kivalina had 44 degrees, about the same there in Kotzebue with 41 in Shishmaref. Wales and Din City closer to 50 thanks to that southerly wind. 44 in Nome. Unalakleet had 50 degrees on the button. 46 in McGrath, 54 in Bethel, and Lake Iliamna was in the lower 50s with King Salmon and Dillingham in the lower to mid 50s there. Also 52 around Sand Point. Cold Bay and False Pass not too far different. 47 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and it was nearly 50 degrees in St. Paul today with St. George at 48. About the same there for Atka, and a blustery day in Adak today at 46 degrees. Here's a look at temperatures overnight. 20s and 30s for southeast, a little bit above the freezing point for many in south central Alaska, but those valleys will probably be colder. 45 in Kodiak, 18 in Fort Yukon, upper 20s for Fairbanks, and right below freezing there for most areas in the North Slope. Prudhoe Bay about 29 degrees, low 30s for the Chukchi Seacoast. Kotzebue Sound temperatures just a hair above freezing, 40 in Nome. And looks like southwest coastal temperatures will hold in the 40s to about 50 degrees into Bristol Bay, low 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid to upper 40s for the chain and parts of the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula to Sand Point. 54 degrees there tomorrow, 53 in Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, upper 40s to low 50s for southeast, even with the sunshine, and lower 50s around Prince William Sound and the Kenai Peninsula. Anchorage close to 50 degrees tomorrow afternoon. Up the Susitna Valley and Parks Highway we go. 52 for Fairbanks, 43 in Eagle, 37 in Fort Yukon and Arctic Village, with the North Slope expecting highs tomorrow in the mid-30s. Around Galena and many points south and west down the Yukon, mid-40s will do the trick, and about 56 degrees tomorrow in McGrath, 47 in Nome for your Tuesday. Flying weather includes IFR for the North Slope tomorrow, as well as areas around St. Lawrence Island, just north of St. Matthew, north of the Pribilofs, and wrapping around low pressure to about Atka. You'll notice IFR south and east of Kodiak, probably including Kodiak in the early morning hours, and you'll see a little bit of improvement in some parts of the region tomorrow, but maybe not right over Kodiak. Watch for IFR sneaking into southern parts of Cook Inlet and over the Barrens. IFR conditions continue for the North Slope. And again, you can see how that area of low pressure is mixing out, pushing that wave of IFR north and west away from the central core of low pressure. Otherwise, MVFR through a large part of the chain, and hit and miss on the southwestern Capes tomorrow. Here's your pass conditions. It looks like most areas will be pretty good. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass will be some of those places with high ceilings and good visibility throughout the daytime tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, not so much. IFR in the morning, probably looking at some improvements, I would say, with Merrill Pass first and then perhaps Lake Clark later in the day. Rainy Pass, expect VFR conditions to prevail. Same goes for Windy Pass on your Tuesday. Things look pretty good in Isabel Pass, VFR flying there, and for Mentasta Pass as we go through your Tuesday. Tonita Pass, we expect to see VFR, and it looks like out around Portage Pass, conditions should prevail. Small seas out there too. It looks like a good day in Prince William Sound. And Chilkoot and White Pass, for now, VFR for your Tuesday. Probably not going to see that again Wednesday and certainly not Thursday. Freezing levels show the impact of high pressure working that warm air northward, and you can see a very steep gradient here right across the Yukon and into British Columbia. All the cold's over here. We still have early fall warmth, let's say, across most of the mainland as well as the west coast. Levels on the west coast down to about 6,000 feet. Interior levels around 10,000 feet, and southeast is benefiting from some of that as well. Around Nikolsky and westward, levels are lower than 4,000 feet for your daytime tomorrow. Icing potential though. There is moisture and there is cold air, but a lot of that is above 6 to about 8,000 feet. So we're going to say light to isolated moderate across the Alaska Peninsula and southwestern Alaska, as well as most of the chain above 6,000 feet. So icing potential is there, but lingering and really focusing on that more unstable area of low pressure out across the Bering and the north and western Gulf. It is creeping eastward though, so monitor that if you need. The look at the jet stream indicates our wacky weather pattern. High pressure sitting across the north and eastern Gulf, and that is pushing its control all the way up into the Chukchi Sea. Now you can see this upside down shape here. It looks like kind of an omega if you're looking at the Greek alphabet. This is an omega block, and it is keeping the active weather to the west and to the east and keeping very stable weather up southeast and into the interior. And until that budges or breaks down, then we are literally blocked in this type of weather pattern. Very fast flow to the west, anywhere from 90 to about 150 knots coming across the North Pacific. That's mirrored below at 9,000 feet. Stable weather to the east and across southeastern Alaska, but a broad, stronger southeasterly flow coming across south central, southwest, and the west coast from about 30 to as high as 50 or even 60 knots. North and northwesterlies are working across the western chain as strong as 85 knots there, and again feeding into some surface winds at 3,000 feet. A very similar pattern, of course, 20 knots or so just west of the Alaska Range. Very light winds across the interior, only 10 to 20 there. Light winds coming up the outer coast of southeast, 10 to 25 from the southeast. And across the central and western chain, winds as high as 70 knots, working across Adak, Kiska, and Atka. So we're going to watch for turbulence in those areas, southwest especially, with at least light to isolated moderate, and in some cases around the Killbucks and Wood Mountains and probably into the southern parts of Cook Inlet, watch for widespread moderate. There will probably be a few cases of isolated severe and watch for wave action in those leeward areas below 4,000 feet. And also across the central chain below 4,000 feet, some occasional moderate is possible there. So probably more of a rough and tumble day rather than an unclear weather flying day. That's what we see on the aviation report today. We'll be back with the rest of your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mary O'Connor with the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health and the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation. Thank you to Alaska Public Media for allowing us to bring you Hangar Flying. This evening, we are honored to have back on our show Ms. Christy Warden. She's the Deputy Division Manager, Airports Division of the Federal Aviation Administration's Alaska region. Christy, welcome back to Hangar Flying.
Thank you, Mary. Good to be here. Thanks.
On our last program, we talked about what you did at the FAA. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the who and why of what you do. So how long have you been with the FAA?
I've been with the FAA coming up on the end of 9 years now.
Wow.
Yep.
And what's your background?
My background is heavy aviation, as you would expect. I grew up on Air Force bases. So in the early 1970s, my family, we were based here at Elmendorf. I remember Elmendorf from 1971 to 1974. I remember the early days. My father was active duty Air Force, and so we did the tour. All of the old SAC, the Strategic Air Command bases. And so that was my very early exposure to aviation. After that, going through my education, high school, college, I went to the airport management route. I decided that I wanted to get into airport management. It was a logical extension of what I had seen growing up. And so I went to college, got an airport management degree, and then after college ended up managing a couple of airports. What we call primary commercial service airports in the upper Midwest and in the Rocky Mountain region. So that was a very good way, and that was a very interesting start to the career, straight out of college, managing a couple of airports. It'll make you well-rounded pretty quickly.
Oh, that. So you weren't working for the FAA, you were working
That's
directly
right.
for the airports.
I was working for a couple of airport sponsors, a couple of municipalities up in the upper Midwest. So then after managing a couple of airports, having grown up largely in the Midwest and seen the degradation of air service in the northern Rocky Mountain region, started up and co-founded what we call a commuter air carrier, a Part 135 air carrier, operating small and rural community routes, intrastate and interstate. And so did the 135 operation. Then following that operation, I went into aviation consulting. airline management and airline planning consulting. That was fascinating, exposing all of my backgrounds from airport management and from the actual flight side to the folks who were considering doing what I had already done. So that was very interesting. After the aviation consulting side, then I joined FAA. And I joined initially in the Southwest region, in Fort Worth, Texas. Southwest region as an AIP, Airport Improvement Program specialist, someone who was working very closely with our district offices, our development offices, to manage and lead our AIP funding and our passenger facility charge approvals within the 5-state region in the southwestern U.S. That was an outstanding way to start my federal career, and it really brought me full circle, having been an airport manager, then dealing with the FAA side of the table.
Well, as well as the carrier side. You've
Exactly.
known it from all three
Exactly,
sides.
and the whole passenger facility program and I go way back from many different sides. So that was a great start to a federal career. Then I spent some time focusing intently on what we call large hub operations, airports in the Houston area. Helping FAA from a strategic, from a collaborative internal and external perspective, as a strategic perspective as a program manager, to manage all of the airport and other projects and initiatives going on in this large metropolitan area. Then, not too long ago, an opportunity arose to come up here to return to my Alaska roots and come back up to the Alaskan region as the Deputy Division Manager. And I was very honored, and really it was a wonderful opportunity to be selected, which is where I am now.
So you've come full circle.
Yes.
That's great. I have to ask, do you need to be a pilot to do what you do?
You don't. I am an old private pilot. I am not current, haven't been current for a long time, but I'm one of those older private pilots, and no, you don't need to be. I think it helps with perspective, especially in small and rural communities, particularly in Alaska. I think it's very helpful, but many of my peers, many of the folks with whom I work professionally are not pilots. Especially a number of women and men who choose to go into the management, into the business side, into the engineering side. And those are all very successful, very prosperous opportunities in aviation.
I think it's great to point out that there are a lot of opportunities in aviation besides just piloting. So you've been a great example. Thank you so much for being here. You're involved with the safe operations of aviation in Alaska, and this was a great opportunity to hear about what you do, although you're not always at the forefront and obvious
Well, thank you.
out there every day, but
Thank
we
you.
know that you're working.
Well, we appreciate that. Thanks, Mary.
So thank you for being here. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show.
All right. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this program was brought to you by the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media. Thank you for watching, and until next time, fly safely.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Mary. We'll see you again on Friday. Here's a quick update for today's Sea Ice Edge. You'll notice that a lot has changed across the northern and western sections of the Chukchi Sea, just offshore anyway, in the last couple of days, and that is because we've had a much clearer visual from the satellite picture that we talk about all the time with our friend Eric Stevens. We've got a really good shot on the satellite picture to see that a lot of that grease ice has gone away. So the ice edge from about Barrow and Wainwright to the north and west, the main ice pack, it's about 300 nautical miles to the north and west for right now, and it's drifting west. So right now, a lot of things are pretty open there. Weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the latest sea ice updates there from the team. Here's a look at southeastern Alaska. Big difference from the inside to outside. Very light, variable winds inside the Lynn Canal tomorrow. Only 2-foot seas there with maybe winds up to about 5 knots or so. A little bit of a northerly push as you work your way southward. Once you get into Clarence Strait, southeasterlies at 20 with a 4-foot sea, and southeasterlies on the outer coast 20 to 25 with 9 to 10-foot seas there on Tuesday. As you get into Wednesday, a little bit more of an offshore push from east to west, 35 knots, southeasterlies outside of the Dixon entrance with 17-foot seas, 18-foot seas up the coast. And then our winds and breezes come back down through the Lynn Canal, through Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. 15 to 25 on the inside with 3 to 5-foot seas for your Wednesday. Remember, clouds and rain are coming along with that. As we get into south central, not too bad inside of Prince William Sound. Northeasterlies 15 with 3-foot seas. In the north and western Gulf, 30 to 40 knot winds with 15-foot seas in the north and 21 to 22-foot seas as you get closer to the Barren Islands and Kodiak Island. Look what happens on the inside there. West of the Barrens to Shelikof Strait, 45 to 50 knot winds. 22 to 24-foot seas are expected there, with north and easterlies coming down Cook Inlet at 25 to 35. Tuesday is going to be a blustery day and not a whole lot of relief as we get into Wednesday. A northerly wind at 10 knots inside of Prince William Sound. Northeasterlies in northern Cook Inlet, 25 knots there with 8-foot seas. And that picks up to 45 knots west of the Barrens, 22-foot seas there, 18-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait, and 40 to 45 knot winds in the north and western Gulf. 21-foot seas expected in all areas there on Wednesday as the winds continue. For the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, an easterly flow inside of Bristol Bay and down the Bering Sea coast we go, 35 knots with a 12-foot sea. Southeasterlies on the Pacific coast, 35 knots with a 19 to 20-foot sea there on Tuesday. Not a huge change for Wednesday, but winds do diminish in some areas. 20 to 30 knots will continue in most regions with 18 to 19-foot seas on the Pacific coast and 7 to 8-foot seas from Bristol Bay all the way down the Bering Sea coast with an easterly flow 25 to 30 knots on Wednesday. We still have some stronger winds across the central and eastern chain on Tuesday. North and westerlies from 35 to 40 knots, 21 to 24-foot seas there from Unalaska to west of Nikolsky, and 25 to 40 knots from Unalaska to Adak there with 16-foot seas north of Adak and Atka. North and westerly winds come in behind at 14 to 16-foot seas there on Tuesday. You'll see those come up a little bit more around Kiska and west. 17-foot seas there, and some higher seas south of Adak, Atka, and Nikolsky at 21 to 22-foot seas, and 10 to 18-foot seas from Unalaska to Adak as we get into Wednesday afternoon, all blowing from the west as well. Now, as we look at the west coast, a broad easterly flow sweeping across the Bering, 25 to about 40 knots with some of the higher winds and seas in the Kuskokwim Delta region, 13-foot seas there with a 40-knot wind. Easterlies blowing across the Pribilofs at 25 knots on Tuesday. Diminishes a little bit, turns to the north and east, 15 knots with an 18-foot sea, and easterlies continue north of Nunivak Island to St. Matthew, 25 knots there with a 9 to 12-foot sea in the northern Bering for Wednesday. For the north slope, broad easterlies there, 25 to 30 knots with 7-foot seas for the Beaufort, and you can see a little bit of a southeasterly flow coming off of Point Hope, 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Easterlies inside of Kotzebue Sound with 4-foot seas on the outside. And as we get into Wednesday, easterlies continue across the Beaufort Sea, 30 to 35 with 10 to 11-foot seas there. Remember, not a whole lot of ice there right now, and 6 to 9-foot seas across the Chukchi Seacoast. Easterlies outside of Kotzebue Sound continue at 20 knots. Recapping tonight's weather, high pressure is losing ground across the interior as rain and clouds move across the Gulf towards southeastern Alaska. More winds for southwest. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Support comes from the University of Alaska College Savings Plan, helping you and your child save for college every step of the way, from diapers to diploma. More information at uacollegesavings.com.